Well, Voyager has a big umbrella-like antenna on board the spacecraft which send the signals back to Earth, and that has to be pointed very precisely at the Earth. Even so, they're still very weak. So the large NASA receiving stations of the Deep Space Network, they're 70-meter radio telescopes, receive these signals and then have to amplify them many times to get them to a usable level. Now, for the Neptune encounter, because the signals are even weaker still than they were at Uranus, NASA have arranged to borrow some scientific radio telescopes and to use these in conjunction with their regular ground stations to get improved signal.
How has Voyager performed along the way? Has it all been faultless? Is it working exactly as it was when it left?
Well, not exactly, no. Unfortunately, one of Voyager's radio receivers failed quite early in the mission, and as the spacecraft flew past Saturn, the platform on which the cameras are carried jammed and is still a little bit sticky. And there have been one or two problems in the onboard computer. So, like everybody, as they get a bit older, Voyager is becoming slightly deaf, a little bit arthritic, and is having a bit of a problem with its memory, but it's still hoping to carry on for some time yet.
But at that enormous distance, can the NASA engineers actually carry out any repairs if anything bad does go wrong?
Well, they're very clever people, and they have already reprogrammed the computers to get around the memory problem. And to give you just one example of this remote medicine on a spaceship, there have been some problems with the alignment of some mirrors in the infrared spectrometer. And the NASA people have found that by using little heaters to warm up the spectrometer, this actually changes the crystal structure of the glue and causes the mirror to move back into alignment. So they've had to go through a cycle of heating and allowing it to cool, and heating it, allowing it to cool, to just keep jiggling this mirror back into correct position. And that's remote control repair work.
Presumably these heaters were never intended for this use. This is just a happy accident, and they've been able to work out this clever idea.
That's right. I'm sure if they'd known the glue was going to fail, they would have designed it differently. But spacecraft often have little heaters like this because depending on whether the sun is shining on you or not, bits of the spacecraft can often get quite cold, and sometimes it's necessary just to heat them up just to keep the electronics working.
John Davies is obviously impressed by the technical achievement, but as an astronomer, he's also interested in the sort of information coming back from the craft. As it approached its rendezvous nearly 5 billion kilometres away, its cameras spotted 6 new moons circling the planet, as well as the 2 we already knew of, Triton and Nereid. But while data such as these are sorted and discussed, and while many theorists will have to go back to the drawing board, Voyager will be heading on away from Neptune at a virtually undiminished rate, out beyond our solar system, but not to be completely lost in space.
To get the trajectory that was required, Voyager flew over the north pole of Neptune and then dipped southwards to fly past Triton. So it's now flying south out of the plane of the solar system, below the ecliptic, and it will travel on out into interstellar space, diving southwards away from the sun as it does so. And that's a deliberate strategy, I think, because Voyager 1 is actually climbing northwards above the planets. So we're getting this nice three-dimensional picture of the sun's outer influence. Voyager will return to its interplanetary cruise mode, and it will start to monitor again the solar wind and the charged particles and so on. And the key thing will be to see how far the sun's influence actually extends. Before Voyager and Pioneer, people thought the sun's influence probably stopped long before the end of the solar system, but now it looks as if it may extend well into what we've previously called interstellar space. So this search for what's called the heliopause, the boundary of the sun's influence, will be continuing throughout the remainder of the Voyager mission, probably for another 10 or 15 years.
And Voyager is equipped to be able to send back information for that length of time, another 10 to 12 years?
Oh yes, the problem is that the Voyager has radioactive power supplies, and these are just gradually running out as the radioactivity decays. So as time goes on, the spacecraft gets both further away and is able to broadcast less and less power. But assuming no terrible systems failures, NASA expects to still be talking to Voyagers in the year 2010. Triton's about the size of one of the small inner planets. Nobody knows exactly. That's one of the things that Voyager's telling us. And it has an atmosphere which contains methane and nitrogen. Nobody knows exactly what proportions these are in, and that's something that Voyager, we hope, will tell us.
Why is it so unusual, then, for a moon to have an atmosphere?
Basically, it's a question of size. To retain an atmosphere, you have to have a planet or a planetary body which has reasonably powerful gravity, otherwise the gas molecules simply escape. Now, Triton has 2 advantages. Firstly, it's quite big, and secondly, it's a long way from the sun. And because it's a long way from the sun, it's very cold, So the molecules in its atmosphere don't move about very fast, so it's a lot easier for it to retain them. The reason that the other moons don't have atmospheres is just basically just too small to hang on to the molecules in the gas.
You say it's cold. How cold is Triton?
It's only around about 50 or 60 degrees above absolute zero.
So very cold indeed. The other moon, Nereid, what sort of a place is that?
Well, it's not a very big place. We think it's about 400 kilometers in diameter, and it has a very eccentric orbit which takes it up to 5 million kilometers from Neptune, and then it travels back in much, much closer to the planet. It's probably a captured asteroid. It's probably been picked up by Neptune at some stage. But the whole of Neptune's moon system is very peculiar. Triton is unique in the solar system because it's a large moon and it orbits the planet in the opposite direction to the way we expect. All the planets go around the sun in the same direction, and almost all of their satellites also go around in that direction. But Triton doesn't. Triton goes around the opposite way to all of the others, and that's a big problem for theorists. And these newly discovered moons are making the situation worse because they all go around in the right direction. And it's very difficult to think how you can form a moon system which has some little moons going around one way, has a big moon in the middle going the other way, and then has another moon further out in a very eccentric orbit.
Do you expect that any of the information from Voyager, when you have had a chance to analyse it, will give us any further clues as to why Triton may be so odd?
The Voyager is going to tell us a lot about the ring system and the moons, and these are all going to place very important constraints on the mathematical models of how the Neptune system formed. Until Voyager, with just the planet, 2 moons, and maybe some partial rings, there were many, many different combinations of circumstances you could invent that would produce the Neptune system. But these discoveries of new moons and new rings will seriously limit the number of possibilities and thus will give us a much clearer understanding of what might have been going on in the outer solar system.
Now, what about the planet itself?
Well, the most important thing we're going to learn is how big it is. Because Neptune's so far from the Sun, it's very difficult to get its diameter accurately. And it's even more difficult to find out its density. That will give us a lot of information about the internal structure of Neptune. At the moment, it's thought to be a rocky core overlaid by a sort of icy, slushy layer of frozen gases with a thick gaseous atmosphere on the top. That's only a mathematical model, and the trajectory of Voyager, as it's deflected by the planet's gravity, will help refine that model considerably.
Some angel of fate must have met one of my 3 mosquito men in his leisurely perambulations, and must have put into his hand a bottle of mosquito larvae, some of which I saw at once were a type different from the usual Culex larvae. Next morning, the hospital assistant pointed out a small mosquito seated on the wall with its tail sticking outwards. I caught it by my method of placing the mouth of a bottle slowly over it and killed it with tobacco smoke. I dissected it at once and found nothing unusual, but while I was doing so, I remember the details well, the worthy hospital assistant ran in to say that there were a number of mosquitoes of the same class which had hatched out in the bottle that my men had brought me yesterday. Sure enough, there they were, about a dozen big brown fellows with fine tapered bodies and spotted wings, hungrily trying to escape through the gauze covering of the flask, which the angel of fate had given to my humble retainer. Dapple-winged mosquitoes.
Ross fed 10 of these on one of his patients. After several days, only 2 of them were still alive. And I think it was the 5th day he dissected one, and under his dissecting microscope, he immediately saw that the stomach of this mosquito was different from the stomach of mosquitoes that he'd seen before.
The 20th of August, 1895, the anniversary of which I always call Mosquito Day, was, I think, a cloudy, dull, hot day. At about 1 p.m., I determined to sacrifice the 7th Anopheles of the batch fed on the 16th, Mosquito 38. The dissection was excellent, and I went carefully through the tissues, now so familiar to me. Nothing. No, these new mosquitoes also were going to be a failure. There was something wrong with the theory. But the stomach tissue still remained to be examined, lying there empty and flaccid. Half an hour's labor at least. I was tired, and what was the use? But the angel of fate fortunately laid his hand upon my head, and I had scarcely commenced the search again when I saw a clear and almost perfectly circular outline before me of about 12 microns in diameter. The outline was much too sharp, the cell too small, to be an ordinary stomach cell of a mosquito. The afternoon was very hot and overcast, and I remember opening the diaphragm of the substage condenser of the microscope to admit more light. In each of these cells, there was a cluster of small granules, black as jet, and exactly like the black pigment granules of the Plasmodium crescens.
As Dr. Nell puts it, the malaria parasite had left its signature in these cysts on the mosquito's stomach wall. Ross, in exuberant mood, celebrated by scribbling a few of his inimitable verses.
This day, relenting God hath placed within my hand a wondrous thing, and God be praised. At his command, seeking his secret deeds with tears and toiling breath, I find thy cunning seeds, O million murdering death. I know this little thing a myriad men will save. O death, where is thy sting?
Right, here we are then.
Right, that's the noise without the controller on. We're now switching the controller on.
Put it back off again. So that's the sort of annoying noise that people are used to hearing in these small cars, and now you can cancel it or reduce it anyway. Well, that was quite a striking demonstration, and in case some of the sound effect was swallowed up due to the limitations of broadcasting, there was also a big sound level meter in front of us on the dashboard, and at the critical frequency, that booming note, the needle dropped quite sharply, showing that key frequency was strongly reduced. Well, now, how was it all done for Fowlkes Williams?
Well, sound, as you know, is a vibration of the air, the pressure going up and down, and that's heard by the ear. Now, if you can make the pressure go down and up in exactly corresponding time, then the peaks of one and the trough of the other will cancel and maintain the calm conditions, the constant pressure, which is silence.
So you're putting in a second sound to, as it were, cancel out the sound that's already
right.
there.
One we call anti-sound, and the other one is sound. And sound plus anti-sound makes the silence.
Well, now, how in practice is it done? What do you actually have to do?
We have to have loudspeakers to make the control sound, the anti-sound. They are driven from an amplifier which is fed from a computer, which has calculated the signals needed to control the noise. The computer gets its information from microphones inside the cabin, and we take a timing marker off the engine. So we know how fast the engine is going, what the basic frequency, the period of the sound is, and the level and phases are measured by microphones. All that information is fed into the computer, and it calculates what to do, tells the loudspeakers to put out the other sound, and you heard the result.
But it obviously has to do this all very quickly indeed. I mean, the sound's changing all the time. How quickly does it do it?
Oh, it does it several thousand times a second. The computers are very fast.
Several thousand times a second, then it will change the output from the loudspeakers so as always to keep that sound suppressed or reduced.
Yes, regardless of the engine speed.
And if the things developed a little bit further, it could take up quite a small space. I mean, there you had a largish box of equipment in the boot of the car.
Yes, we had a general-purpose computer in the boot of the car there, but I would not expect it to occupy the space that is taken by the current hi-fi set in a motor car. And the loudspeakers would be the same speakers as is used in the normal wireless system.
Well, now, is this just a pretty demonstration, or is there a serious purpose in doing it on this small car? In fact, is it ever going to be practical on cars that you and I would buy?
I think that the answer to that is probably yes. In the last 5 years, electronics has become much more versatile. The chips can do wonderful things in a very small space, and it now appears to be possible to manufacture the systems on a compact scale at a small price, and it probably will compete with conventional methods of sound suppression.
alarm clocks, possibly the most hated invention in the history of technology. But according to Leslie Brothers, a psychiatrist from the University of California at Los Angeles, not everyone has to experience such a rude awakening in order to get to work on time.
It appears there are a number of people who are able to decide what time they're going to wake up, let's say in the middle of the night or early in the morning, decide that before they go to bed, and then their eyes pop open at that time. This is something that there's really no explanation for in our understanding of how the brain works, but it's a very interesting thing that many people have had that experience, and so we thought, well, maybe this is telling us something important.
It implies that people have some kind of internal clock, if you like, that they can control, set.
Yes, exactly. And furthermore, that clock seems to be pretty accurate. Because if you think about the fact that you may go to bed at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and that you can come within a few minutes of a time like 5 or 5:30 in the morning, you're talking about a total duration of 7 or 8 hours, and within that, an accuracy of just a few minutes. People seem to be able to do that whether they are in a strange environment or a familiar environment, and there are all kinds of reasons to think that it doesn't have to do with something that you're hearing or something that you're aware of in your environment. So we began with that, and it led us to wonder if there are other aspects of human performance, awake human performance, that might have a similar time accuracy.
Well, if anyone's brain should be wired up for accurate timekeeping, it's that of an orchestral conductor. So Leslie Brothers and her colleagues duly tracked down a conductor to take part in their experiments.
We discovered from her something that we didn't know, which is that conductors and musicians in general often practice by just mentally rehearsing the piece of music that they're getting ready to perform. And this woman was in the process of rehearsing a performance, and she agreed to time her rehearsals for us. And that would give us a chance to see how accurate does the duration of her mental rehearsal seem to be. And what we were particularly interested in was comparing each mental rehearsal of a similar piece of the music to every other mental rehearsal to see in some way how stereotyped her mental operations were.
So when you say rehearse, does this mean she would take the score and look through it?
No, it means in essence that she might be sitting quietly in a chair. In fact, this is what she would do, sit quietly with her eyes closed even, not hearing any taped music, but simply imagining herself, her motions, perhaps imagining her score, but not looking at it. Now the interesting finding is that early in her rehearsals, mental rehearsals, she was trying to memorize, and she was still learning the music in essence. And her accuracy was about 3%. So that over a total duration of some minutes, she would be within a certain number of seconds of accuracy for all of those rehearsals of the same movement. Now later, after she had really effectively memorized the piece and was very familiar with it and was just in her last phases of rehearsal, her accuracy became much better, which it went down to about 1.5%, which is in essence just a few seconds for a movement, of several minutes.
Dr. Brothers argues that anyone who's trying to explain how the brain works has to take this remarkable timekeeping ability into account. For the conductor, of course, it's just second nature.
In the standard cosmological model, it takes approximately something like 10 to the 32 solar masses, 1 followed by 32 zeros, that many times the mass of the sun, to start the universe. In the inflationary model, on the other hand, it's very different. The inflationary model actually incorporates a mechanism for creating matter. So in the inflationary model, all you need to do is to get this process called inflation started, and then the universe can grow to become arbitrarily large. To get inflation started seems to take a mass of about 10 kilograms only. So it creates a completely different picture to the question of what starts a universe, and it makes it a very interesting question to ask whether or not it's possible, in principle, to start a new universe today. Even though I'm only talking about something like 10 kilograms, I'm talking about compressing that 10 kilograms into a space which is more than 1 billion times smaller than a proton. So the density is enormous, far beyond anything that's attainable today, and really far beyond anything that's attainable in the foreseeable future.
While pondering this question, Professor Guth has considered what would happen if the process occurred again inside our own universe, assuming, of course, that the matter could be compressed into a very small volume.
What happens is this very tiny region of space will undergo this process called inflation, just like what we think happened in the early universe. And the volume will expand enormously to become as large as and even much larger than the visible universe. On the other hand, it will not expand outward and displace the universe that we live in. What happens is much more peculiar. This incredible density of matter creates a very large distortion of the structure of space, which is crucial to what's happening here. So what happens is this tiny region expands, but it expands internally without displacing our universe. And in a very short length of time, a small fraction of a second, it actually pinches off completely from our universe. A picture which gives reasonably good intuition about what's happening is to imagine our universe being pictured as a sheet of rubber. Then take a small piece of this sheet of rubber and punch it downward if it's a horizontal sheet, and then pull out a bulge in this sheet of rubber, and then imagine pinching it off at the neck, which connects it to the rest of the sheet. That is a fairly accurate picture of what's going on.
Professor Guth calls his elusive creations child universes. If they do exist in reality, it is possible that we may not be living on the original universe. We may be the inhabitants of a child universe, or the child of a child universe. In fact, our universe could have an infinite number of ancestors, which could neatly sidestep the need to explain what happened and what existed before the beginning of time.
Certainly the possibility of universes creating other universes seems very real. It becomes something of a philosophical question whether or not that avoids the need for a start. I would tend to think that it does not avoid the need for a start. Some people disagree with me. I don't know how we'll ever settle those differences. But at the moment, I think the real interest is in exploring the technical aspects to these questions to try to figure out what is possible within the laws of physics as we know them.